and welcome to the Rob Call Bottom Up Show. I'm really excited with my guest for this show. Dr. Caitlin O'Connell has been called a modern Renaissance creative. I see her as an adventurer in the same class as Thor Heyerdahl, Jacques Cousteau, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and John James Audubon. Dr. O'Connell is currently on the faculty at the Eaton Peabody Lab at Harvard Medical School studying elephant low-frequency hearing, while also overseeing a nonprofit foundation's Utopia Scientific, promoting the importance of science and conservation. She's an award-winning author and photographer and has been studying elephants in the wild and many, many other animals and creatures, fish and birds and insects. You're like a Dr. Doolittle almost. You almost talk to the animals. And she's got a new book out, a powerful new book, Wild Rituals, 10 Lessons Animals Can Teach Us About Connection, Community, and Ourselves. She's also written books for kids too, which is really cool. Her website is CaitlinO'Connell with 2 L's.com. Her social media handle is Elephant Skinny, which I guess means you give people the skinny on elephants.
Yes, exactly.
And so we're going to do about an hour. Let's start with, what's a definition of a ritual?
Well, that's a good question. A ritual is something that you repeat regularly and you do with purpose. Some action that you engage in is done with purpose, and it's there's an exaggerated element that actually stimulates the amygdala to recognize that something different is happening. And rituals are done by many different animals, which is why I was inspired to write this book, because rituals they're very important to us, but they're also equally as important to other animals, and they stimulate similar beneficial hormones. So the ritual of looking each other in the eye, smiling and saying hello actually stimulates the bonding hormone, where oxytocin is something that a mother and child, when they look at each other, they get all warm and fuzzy. That bonding hormone is beneficial to even strangers, or even between you and your dog. So rituals have these very deep physiological elements to them, along with psychological elements. And sometimes we ignore rituals that we really shouldn't. And it's not good for us to not smile at each other and say hello. Greeting rituals are really, really important. And they act like social grease. And again, they elevate your mood and make both you and the person, so even a random person walking down the street, it actually makes you both feel better. And I wanted to write this book to remind ourselves of the importance of even the smallest thing, of looking each other in the eye. And during this whole 1.5 years of pandemic, where we had to wear masks and couldn't see each other, couldn't touch each other, I think it magnified this loss that we all felt during this time of not being able to see each other, not engage. And this book is a reminder of why it is so important to engage in ritual. And you go from the simplest thing of a greeting to a much more elaborate ritual for, say, grieving, or even the silliness of play is very beneficial, not only for, say, a lion to learn how to be a better hunter by catching their siblings and pretending to deliver the killing blow by chewing on their neck or chewing on their spine. All of these things that other animals engage in really inform their physical strength and prowess, and make them better at things that they need to do later in life. And that's the same for us. Play allows us to explore creatively. There's studies on children being better at language earlier on by playing with each other and exploring with language. Whereas if they play with an adult, they don't explore, they don't tend to take risks and explore with language as much as when they play with each other. And so for us, there's not only a physical component to play, but also this psychological development that comes with play. It allows us to be more creative. And as adults, even corporate organizations recognize the value of play and the value of building trust through play. So taking risks as a group, and whether it's walking a tightrope or doing some kind of group engagement, later on in the boardroom, when you're brainstorming something, you've built that trust through a game or some kind of play that allows you to throw out ideas that you might not have otherwise done because you felt you didn't have the confidence to expose yourself. And play allows you this safe environment to expose yourself and experiment with new things. And in other species, there's actually an invitation to play. Like with elephants, a young male elephant will place their trunk over the head of another one to announce that they have this intent to play, and it's in a safe environment. I think everyone has seen a dog bow down in the play bow. That is an invitation. Look, anything that happens from here on in is all play, and we will not be hurting each other. And so there's that ritual element of play is an announcement that we're going to enter this zone. And that's what I was saying before about there's certain physical elements to ritual that let you know that a ritual is about to start. And so to get back to your original question, what is ritual? It is a space that is designed psychologically and physically to engage in a repetitive action that is very beneficial.
Yeah, yes. And your book goes into so many details of just how many ways it's beneficial, not just to humans, of course, but to all kinds of animals. Really, without rituals, animals would not do very well. They wouldn't survive necessarily. It's an essential part of their social structure, and I guess really of their evolution, right?
Yes. Even, to the point of courtship rituals, play rituals, which allow them to evade predators or to catch prey. Even the gifting ritual is very important. And for females, it shows if a male presents a gift for courtship purposes, it shows that they're fit enough to get a gift. And it also announces intent. For us, gift giving has many psychological parameters that, we've kind of allowed modern commercialism to run away with our gift giving ritual. And it's really too bad. And I tried to bring out the reasons behind gift giving, and it has to do with remembering each other and really commemorating a relationship. And it's often more about the giver than the receiver, that person would like to be remembered in your life. Let's say for a wedding gift, your great aunt presents something that's an heirloom from the family and wants that to be passed on as a symbol of the family. And these kinds of rituals are really important to build family heritage, history, and strengthen relationships and connectivity between generations. And so each of the rituals that I describe, I go through why they're important in the animal kingdom and why they're important to us and how similar we are to our animal relatives. And that's, the reason that I wrote this book was just that interconnectivity. I've studied elephants for the last 30 years. And it always strikes me that every day it's a special day to greet each other. And that's so important for us. We tend to look at our partners and in the morning, you get up and get your coffee, and you might not even say good morning to your loved ones. And those simple acts of saying hello are really, really important. And sometimes our dog reminds us of how important that is even before we recognize it in ourselves. And just being able to see how important rituals are to other non-human animals is just an important reminder of how these rituals are important to us and why we should engage in them and not put them aside and take them for granted.
One thing in reading your book that became really clear to me is that human use of rituals has, I don't know if it's the right word, but it's kind of atrophied. We don't do it as much. And you talk about it. And I think what this book reminds us is that this is who we are. This is in our genes. This is in our neurobiology. Right?
Yes, it is. And like I said, there are these physiological benefits, and really they help us feel more connected to the community. I have a whole chapter on group ritual and how these group rituals evolved in early societies and why it was important to have group identity. As populations got bigger, groups wanted to have, an inclusive element to recognize each other and to bond to each other. All of these elements help early man be better hunters. They were better at forming coalitions so that they could take down very large animals, which they needed to do to survive. And then that group ritual kind of evolved over time, where it's really great to be in a club or to be in certain societies where you have this inclusive element that you feel bonded to each other. Now, I do add a warning and a caveat about group rituals, is that there's a downside to inclusivity, and that is, by the nature of being inclusive, you're also exclusive. And I use examples to remind ourselves of the dangers, and the power of group rituals could be used in a negative way, and we need to recognize that power and use it in a positive way.
So I was going to ask you about that, because it would seem to me that I'm interested in fundamentalism, religious fundamentalism. And it would seem to me that there are some ways that rituals can go in you call it dangerous, but in ways that are not necessarily good for everybody, or that isolate people. Have you looked at or thought much about like fundamentalism and how that affects people in terms of their rituals?
Well, certainly, I talk about this very specifically. When we engage, let's say we engage in a group march, or let's think about synchronized swimming. Everyone is doing exactly the same thing in coordination. It's amazingly synchronized. There's a power to that confers a sense of transcendence, that the group is larger than the individuals. And that is very powerful. That's a very powerful thing, whether it's religion, singing in a chorus in a church is very powerful, that everyone gains power from that, gains power from the group. But because there is so much power that can be wielded, that it could also turn to a negative end. And there are cult leaders that either they have a good intent or they end up having a bad intent. And we've seen that in political leaders throughout time, and sometimes religious leaders or political leaders or both, where we have to recognize that there is so much power that can be gained from a group ritual. Like, a peaceful march could turn riotous, for example, where the original intent was peaceful, but suddenly it got out of hand, and this negative energy can spiral. And we need to recognize that and make sure that those things don't happen. And just by understanding that things can get out of control is an important first step towards wielding that power to a good and to a positive end.
It would seem to me like having an understanding of this might help people who are in cults to be rescued from those cults.
Yes, definitely, that it is a kind of brainwashing. It's so powerful that it's immobilizing, that it makes it very difficult to extract yourself from this inclusive groups. All of the repeated mantras and sometimes wearing certain clothing and all the things that identify you and bond you to this group make it very difficult to leave the group. And that is just something that that I wanted to talk about because of exactly that. What people get caught up in cults, or they get caught up in a cult leader and don't realize that they're doing things that they never would normally do. And it's a kind of, it's so powerful that it's brainwashing. It makes it very difficult to get out of.
And as you've said, it's engaging in rituals activates hormones. And so there are a whole symphony of hormones that can do exactly that with a cult member and get them connected. Now, the other side of it is that you've talked about it in multiple places in the book about how rituals build trust. And that seems to me to be so important. But I wanted to, we've only got a limited amount of time here. And I'd like you to tell us a story from your work that is emblematic of what you've discovered in looking at rituals in animals.
Well, there are a number of them. So one example that it always sticks in my mind, there's two elephants that I have followed over the years, Knob Nose and Donut. And I talk about in the greeting ritual chapter how these two elephants, they're always together, but they got separated for maybe a half hour or so, and they came together in the middle of the road as I'm driving down the road, this dusty calcrete road, and they did not see me at all. They were paying no attention to me. They were just so intent on getting together and greeting each other, where they stopped in the middle of the road. That both have their heads facing each other, their ears are flapping, and they drop their trunks to the ground and standing side by side. And they have this whole ritual engagement where it's almost as if it's like they were in a trance. They had their trunks on the ground, they're rumbling, and then elephants, when they're very excited and greet each other, they also urinate and defecate during this period. So it is very hormonal that they just eliminated their bowels. And then
maybe that's not something that should be done on a person's first date or something like
yeah, probably not. For humans it would be different. But then they place their trunk in each other's mouth, which is a very trusting behavior, because you could bite the tip of the trunk off, and then the trunk is very sensitive. So placing it in the other's mouth is a sign of trust, and that is very similar to our handshake. And the handshake in humans is thought to have evolved to show an opponent that you're not carrying a weapon. That's one of the understandings of how handshaking evolved. In addition, by touching each other's hand, we're also exchanging hormonal information. Subliminally, we are picking up on the other person. So seeing how intense this interaction was just was so powerful to me, and was a great reminder of how these greetings are not simply just to say hello, but they also facilitate a really deep bonding, and the repeated nature of greeting each other at every moment you can, coming back together, and the intensity of that is just a reminder of how important greetings are. And that's again what inspired writing this book.
So one of the things that was fascinating to me was this elephant greeting where they put their the tip of their trunk in each other's mouth. It helps young elephants learn what to eat, what's safe to eat, and it tells any elephant what the one they're greeting has had for dinner recently.
Well, yeah, that's the interesting thing, and it's true for wolves as well as elephants, where there's a behavior, and it's also true for flamingos and ritualized behaviors. So, for example, the elephant placing a trunk in the mouth to learn what is safe to eat, or a wolf licking another's mouth to know what they just ate. That very practical behavior, or a flamingo stretching their wings, is a very practical behavior. And over evolutionary time, these behaviors got fixed into a ritual that no longer is the original. There's no longer that original meaning behind. So the trunk to mouth behavior for an elephant is no longer done to find out what is safe to eat. A youngster will do it, but two adults, when they place their trunk in each other's mouth, they're not looking to find out what the other one ate. They are greeting each other. So those practical behaviors became ritualized into a very important greeting in that situation. Or for the flamingo, that wing leg stretch that was evolved from a stretching behavior into a ritualized courtship behavior. So there are many examples of this in nature. So for example, the blue-footed booby will present a female with a stick when he presents his gorgeous blue feet to her, and then he will also take a stick and ceremonially hand it to her with his beak. But it's interesting because the blue-footed booby doesn't use sticks to make their nest. They nest on the ground. So the idea here is that this was a vestige of previous evolutionary pathway where the stick presentation would be something for a nest, but for the blue-footed booby, there is no nest. So it's purely symbolic. And this is an example of how a practical behavior got ritualized into a very symbolic gesture. So that female can't use the stick for nest building, but it's a gesture as that became incorporated into the ritual, or was not lost from the ritual over time when an ancestor of the booby had used sticks in nests, but then the modern booby does not use sticks. So that's one of the examples that bird researchers like to use as a demonstration of the evolution of certain behaviors that go beyond the original practical behavior.
And practically, I would imagine that could have happened, the change in the nesting could have happened hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago, and that it persists.
Yeah, that ritual persisted, but the nest building changed. Right. So it's fascinating to track some of these rituals, where they came from, and how that original purpose doesn't exist anymore. But
right, so we need to take a quick break for show ID. And when I come back, I want to know, you write about the history of the ritual of handshaking in humans, and I never saw the history of handshaking. So let's talk about that when we get back, okay? So got to pause for about 25 seconds, and I can plug in the bumpers, then we'll come back to it.
Okay.
And my guest for this show is Dr. Caitlin O'Connell. She is an extraordinary modern Renaissance creative, an adventurer in the same class as Thor Heyerdahl and Jacques Cousteau and John James Audubon. She's got a new book out, The Wild Rituals, 10 Lessons Animals Can Teach Us About Connection, Community, and Ourselves. So in your book, you talk about the history of the human handshake. How far back does that go? I mean, and is it something that has evolutionary ties before humans?
Well, no, the handshake is thought to have evolved in the times of, sword and sandals, where men carried either a gun or a sword, or, well, before guns were invented, but a knife or a sword, that by shaking a hand shows that you don't have anything, say, up your sleeve, or it's a gesture of trust that you're not hiding a weapon. And that then became ritualized into our modern handshake. And that's one hypothesis of how this gesture evolved, which is not the case with, say, chimpanzees or gorillas. But they have very similar hugging behaviors, tactile greetings, and also very similar expressions to show a gaze, smiling. So chimpanzees and gorillas have a very similar way of opening their mouth and showing a smile, which originally we thought was more of a fear response. And then over time, studying this expression, we realized that it is very similar to humans smiling, but they also have what's called a play face, where they would invite each other to play by lifting their lip up and then also pulling their lower lip down. So it's like a full smile. And
That's
that would
something
be,
that not all people can do, though.
What, smiling?
No, they smiling with lifting up the upper lip necessarily. That's, I think, it takes some special, I think that's the platysma muscle that does that. I studied smiling in great depth, even doing surface electromyographic studies of smiling.
Oh,
So
interesting.
I'm fascinated with that. So the idea that they're using an aspect of a smile for play, first of all, I love that there is a play smile. That's such a fun thing, really.
Yeah, yes.
And then you mentioned how the dog does it by kind of bowing down. And as soon as you said it, it was like, absolutely, I know what that looks like. And
Yes.
I always remembered, because there's a lower lip smile that I remember Mary Lou Retton, the gymnast, really did that a lot. And so, I mean, they're smile athletics in a sense, really.
I'm gonna have to look that one up since we're all watching the gymnastics from the Olympics now.
I've got hours of questions I put together here, and I know I'm not going to get to them all, but one of them I wanted to get to is, you've been doing this for 30 years. You have literally dived into it, studying marlin, or was it swordfish or marlin? Which was it?
Oh, wait, you mean
Some kind of a game fish that would go after the
yes, the sailfish.
Sailfish, yeah.
Sailfish. They're very similar to the swordfish, but they use their fin in a coordinated fashion, like a net. They will swim in a circle around. They'll corner off a school of fish from a larger school, and then use that sail to corral the fish into these tighter groups, so that then they can take their the sailfish also has a sword like the marlin. They go through the school of fish and kind of use their sword to damage the fish, because you'll see a lot of scales falling down. But the only way they can get the fish into such a dense column is to coordinate their hunting together and swim around the column of fish using their sail to keep the fish in this column, so that each one of them can then dive through the middle of the column and grab fish as they go.
You've actually observed this in the
Oh, yes, yes.
This is why I think you're such an adventurer in the same class as Thor Heyerdahl and what have you, because you have actually gone out there and breathed it in. You've done it in so many places all over the world. It's just incredible, really. Someday maybe they'll make a movie about you. Not a Dr. Dolittle, but it's really cool. So from all of this, all your experience, what have you incorporated into your life? How have you changed the way you relate to other people or to the world, or the way you look at yourself in terms of all of this?
Well, I think there's a certain mindfulness that one gains from observing ritual in nature, and even to the point of travel being a ritual in and of itself, because it takes your mind away from your normal thought patterns, your daily routines, and puts it in this other environment that allows you to then abstract yourself from your normal day-to-day routines and think about the world in a larger way, and to be more conscious about the importance of the natural world, the importance of other animals in this world. And I think writing this book was a real opportunity for me to focus on what those important things are, thinking about the things that myself and others who care about the environment, are very much aware of climate change and that impact on the natural world and the species that I talk about in my book. And it just engaging in ritual helps us think about and focus on what's important in our lives, and in terms of relationships, in terms of having a balance with the natural world, and spending time in nature in order to help inspire thoughts about, even to the point of thinking about mortality. I have a chapter on renewal rituals, and apparently the Japanese have for centuries used notebooks and kept a watch over the timing of, say, nest building of certain birds, and when on the days that the leaves turn. Just keeping a journal about the passage of time helps us have a more positive, constructive relationship with time, rather than being in denial about.
But wait, because
Yes.
I'm not sure you answered my question, though. You've given
Okay.
some intellectual things about what's important with ritual, but for you personally, what have you done in your life, the way you relate to others, the way you live your life, in terms of, have you learned anything from elephants that you do now? I'm not talking about sticking your finger in your husband, but
No. I was really coming to that, and that this book helped me focus on those things that are important. And that's where the mindfulness comes from. Like, I'll watch elephants and watch how they communicate with each other. And, there are physical reasons why a group of elephants would. So there's a vocalization called the let's go rumble. And the matriarch initiates this let's go, like, we're now going to leave the water hole. She emits this rumble, and the rest of the group waits till she's almost finished with what she's saying. And then the next leader, the more dominant female, will respond, and she'll rumble. And then the next one will rumble. And just something simple like that, it, for me, is a reminder to wait your turn when you're in a conversation. Listen first, and then speak. And so there's some very simple things, but really meaningful things that I have incorporated into my life from working with elephants. And that would be one example. And another is this mindfulness about the passage of time. And, even to the point of sitting in your backyard or a city park in the springtime and watching birds build nests and recognizing that we are in spring, and this is where spring cleaning helps us kind of press the reset button. And, you know, people look for ways to make a change in their lives, say on the 1st of January. Well, what would that change be? And writing this book, and particularly the renewal chapter, helped me think about what are the things that I can change in my life. And again, it comes back to mindfulness, but I did this gut renewal, a 30-day gut renewal that really helped me realize how important what goes in our mouth will do to our attitude, to our physical well-being, to our mental well-being. And so there's the things that I've changed are more of an awareness of how I can be a better person from the inside out, and to communicate better with others, to be more explicit about communication and intent. And that's what I hope, that was my journey in writing the book and what I hope to impart to others.
That's great. I just want to read a couple little notes I took about some of the ways that rituals help with cooperation. You say engaging in a ritual can relieve stress, decrease anxiety, make us more present, and even improve our cognition. Engaging in ritual can be critical for learning and long-term memory, allowing us to improve our concentration, problem solve faster, and think on a deeper level. And rituals create mutual language to facilitate connection. Now, you know, it got me thinking about early on in humanity, before there was writing, before most people wrote, before there were books, I think rituals played a more important role because that helped them to remember things. Part of rituals was repetition. And I guess when you go into some kind of a religious place, you're going to be saying prayers that are repetitive as well. Does this fit in? Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Yes. In my acoustic ritual chapter, I talk about this, particularly with traditional societies that have storytelling is a huge proponent of how to pass on information. And this is well known in the Aboriginal societies in Australia, song lines, and this idea of passing on details, important details about society and about survival within a story or song. And more traditional societies still engage in these kinds of passing along of information.
Are we losing anything because we have other means of doing that, books and writing and computers and video and all that stuff?
Well, in some sense, there is a loss of awareness, but in another sense, there's all of these great ways that we can communicate with each other. And, you know, as we've seen during the pandemic, it's not nearly as good to have a conversation with Zoom, but at least it's better than nothing. We would have been that much more isolated if we didn't have the internet to communicate through. So there's very positive elements of technology, but technology can also distance ourselves, and we need to recognize that it's not good enough just to have that Zoom conversation. Now that we can get back together and see each other, plan that next family reunion in person and be together and really have the rich exchange that you would have in person, that is much harder to do on Zoom.
But are there rituals that have developed on Zoom now with everybody using it that you've observed?
I mean, we're trying to make up for not being able to be physical, but at least we can see each other. I mean, I think the video internet platform has allowed us to express ourselves visually, where in, you know, most of my business and personal conversations have been through the phone, so it's purely voice. And what I think the pandemic has done is made us realize more and more the importance of video conferencing, which had been around, but even some of the top institutions that I worked at they weren't as good as they could be, and things would break down, and so people just default to audio. And I taught a class in science writing for Stanford University, and it was all chat rooms, typing. We communicated by typing to each other, and it was very dynamic, surprisingly so. But these days, you'd never do that. You would do it with the visuals, and that's a step forward in technology that has been great for all kinds of forms, for business conferences, for workshops, for small. My lab meetings are all through video conferencing, and we would never have done that before. And so that's a huge advantage.
And you talk about how a simple hello or handshake is actually an opportunity to strengthen bonds, pay respect, or even calm a brewing feud. And that our most natural state of social interaction is touch or physical proximity, which is a real problem with Zoom and the pandemic.
Yes, and that physical exchange does allow us to have a hormonal exchange, which when you don't have that physical proximity, even being near each other, you again have this exchange of oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone. Being in person, there's many physical advantages that you don't get from video conferencing. And I use one example that's many women would have experienced, this hormonal synchrony of being in a dorm room together, and suddenly we're all cycling together with our periods. And that's just an example of how in-person hormonal exchanges work. And I see this in elephants, where the dominant male who's in the hormonal state of must, he can suppress other bulls from going into must purely by his presence, by proximity. And so there's a lot of power to hormones that we don't really acknowledge.
Yeah, and you talk a little bit about elephant courtship rituals and their mating. I love what the rest of the herd of elephants do after the elephants have sex. You want to describe that whole thing a little bit? It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. And copulation in elephants is this group affair that everyone plays a role, and after the male mounts the female, there's this jubilant post-copulatory rumbling that happens, and it's kind of like a rave. They get so excited, and there's roaring and rumbling, and it makes you think of how sterile some social interactions might be in captivity, and how elephants learn from each other how to be better mothers. And if they don't have that experience, that's some of the reason in captivity why young new mothers don't do very well, or they reject their calf, or they try and stomp on it because they're so confused they don't know what it is. But in the wild, that would never happen, because there's so many experienced mothers that can come in and help the new mother welcome her baby and recognize what's going on. And that's a big problem for social animals that need to learn from each other, and they don't have that in captivity most of the time.
I think you're right also that they not only make a lot of noise, but they defecate and urinate while they're doing it too, right? Well, you said that they do that as a greeting as well.
As a greeting, yes. When they're very excited, they will greet and urinate, defecate, everything. Just is a very physiological response. And the males don't do that. They don't urinate and defecate when they greet, but they have, very similar to men in a bar, they have the kind of back slapping, and even to the point of revering, say, the mafioso don. Each male lines up, places their trunk in the mouth, and then steps away, and the next male will come up, place the trunk in the dominant bull's mouth, and steps away. And it's so fascinating how similar male elephant society is to human males, even including elders really playing an important role in mentoring young bulls. And like I said earlier, if there isn't an older bull in proximity, young bulls can go into this hormonal state of must much earlier than they would normally. And this high testosterone level causes them to kind of go berserk. They can get very aggressive. There's a contention between elephants and rhinos to begin with, but in situations where young bulls don't have that hormonal oversight of the older bulls, they can start attacking rhinos. And this has happened in several parks in South Africa, where they brought older bulls in that the younger ones didn't necessarily know, but they immediately went out of this hormonal state and stopped acting in this crazy way. So it's very interesting to see not only the hormonal oversight of older bulls, but also that older bulls appear to seek out the young bulls to spend time with them. And it's
Mentor them, eh?
yeah, they really do have this mentorship component to their society.
Okay, we need to take another quick break, and we'll be back. And I want to talk about how the elephants use their penises too.
Okay.
And my guest for this show is the extraordinary Dr. Caitlin O'Connell. She's been called a modern resonant. She's been called a modern resonant.
Renaissance.
Yeah, my head is just getting weird. She's been called a modern Renaissance creative. She's an adventurer in the same class as Thor, Heyerdahl, and Jacques Cousteau. And she's currently on the faculty at Harvard Medical School, Eaton Peabody Lab, where she studies elephant low-frequency hearing. She is an award-winning author of books for adults and children, and she's the author of a powerful new book, Wild Rituals, 10 Lessons Animals Can Teach Us About Connection, Community, and Ourselves. So, what's the deal with the elephants, with their penises? They use them for communication, I understand, right?
They do. Elephants are very visual and they have a lot of body language.
I thought you were going to say they have a lot of penis.
They have a lot of body language, and males tend to use the penis as a way of signaling their intent. So if a subordinate male approaches a dominant male to place their trunk in their mouth, they will often drop their penis in supplication. So they have a retractable penis, like some other animals. Whales would be one example. And so when you look at an elephant, to the naive observer, you'd have to look at the rounded head and whether there's a sheath where the penis retracts into. It's hard to tell between a male and a woman if you don't know a male and female elephant, if you don't know what to look for. But as soon as they drop their penis, it's very obvious that it's a male.
How big are they? It's like, I know.
If a male drops their penis completely relaxed, it can almost hit the ground. So as long as an elephant leg, basically. So
something like that, 4 feet.
They're in about, I
Wow.
have to say that I have not measured one personally, but
you're a scientist, and
well, I have no need to do that because they retract most of the time. But
I've looked at some of the videos of your work. I mean, and you are there. You set up a compound with multiple stories. You can get a good view, and the elephants surround you. I mean, what you do as a scientist is incredible. I mean, you're a storyteller and you put all the pieces together in a brilliant way, but you're out there getting the raw data. So
yes, it really is a privilege to have the opportunity to investigate this other society. It's like being an anthropologist and having this window into the secret world, and understanding how male elephants have this really bonded, rich society that we hadn't really paid attention to before. and how females operate in their families is very similar to humans, and human politics between matriarchs and hierarchies within families and family feuds. These things are very similar to humans, and it's a privilege to be able to observe them for as long as I have.
Is there a way to quantify it? I mean, how many rituals have you seen in elephants? How many in humans? How many in chimps? I mean, are there numbers that you can put on this at all?
Well, rituals can arise out of certain pressures or environmental situations. So it really doesn't make sense to put a number on them. The chimpanzee, I talk about this rock throwing behavior where males will approach a certain kind of tree and throw a rock at it. And it's a very ritualized behavior. And they're really doing it. They'll choose a certain kind of tree that resonates. So they're announcing themselves for as many kilometers as that noise would travel. They throw this rock and they get all excited and vocalize and then drum against the tree and then run away. Now, that ritual, we think, has some connection to how humans evolved special sites. So that site of a specific tree that resonates is kind of like a sacred site for chimpanzees, or Jane Goodall would call them sacred. But for humans, it's a very parallel thing that we decide on a very specific place that is special, and then we revisit that site and revisit that site. And it's thought that this might be the way in which we developed special religious sites, because they have particular meaning, like Stonehenge and where the sun and the moon might line up in the equinox. And there are physical reasons why we have chosen certain sacred sites in our own societies. But to count the number of rituals, we develop rituals all the time based on our environment. You asked about Zoom rituals, and I couldn't think of one specifically, but we have developed rituals out of this pandemic. So certain things that happen in society can cause us to develop new rituals, and they're changing all the time. And as some anthropologists have a stipulation that you have to pass that particular action down to the next generation within your society. So it's not fixed in your genes.
Is that epigenetic?
Yes, well, that's the definition of epigenetic, things that pressure you from the outside, whether it's environmental pressures or the food that you eat or whatever it is. But certain societies have rituals surrounding water, if water is an important element to them, whether a river society or people that live in a desert have different rituals based on the desert environment, the Bedouins and wearing all black. And there are a lot of rituals that wouldn't make any sense in an environment that had water that was ubiquitous, in an ocean society, or people that live, in the forest and in the jungle. So we develop certain rituals based on our environment and incorporate those elements of the environment in our rituals and ceremonies, because those environments are so important to us. So different rituals evolve based on your particular situation.
I guess I asked the question about the numbers because it seems to me you've identified so many different rituals within elephants. I mean, do elephants have more rituals than humans? Do humans have more than elephants? Are they comparable? Or
I wouldn't use numbers. It's just the thing that's striking is that we have similar needs for rituals, and so those rituals are similar. So we have greeting rituals, we have grieving rituals to get together and really feel the pain of loss and have a ceremony around that and a mindfulness around it. Elephants do the same thing. To have group rituals facilitate bonding, and both humans and elephants need that ritual. So the way I set up the book of 10 important rituals, there are many more rituals, but I picked 10 that I thought that we would all connect to because we experience them in our lives, like play and group.
Well,
And
one of them you mentioned, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're almost out of time, is courtship rituals. Are there courtship rituals in animals that could teach people something about how to court or how to be in remote romantic relations better?
I think one thing that is important when you're watching other animals engage in courtship rituals is the mindfulness, the importance of the actual ritual of courtship. Sometimes we take that for granted, but in the act of courting your loved one, you're actually deepening the bond that you have between you. Taking the time to go to a special dinner together or to listen to a piece of music together is a way of making our connection to each other deeper. And I bring out certain examples of animals just as a reminder of how important these rituals are, but also the physical reasons behind some of how courtship rituals evolve. Like for a female bird, there are some females that will sit back and watch a male engage in an elaborate dance, and you think, what is going on in her head? But in some examples, she's actually counting, say, how fast the footsteps are in a certain species, or how their ability to move on the branch, and that tells her how fit he is. So there's many very practical reasons for courtship and for a female to understand the relative fitness of one male versus another and make her decisions accordingly. And so it's fascinating to understand some of the benefits of courtship rituals, and it, you can have fun with that and think, okay, so what does that mean for bridesmaids going to a Chippendales entertainment, or how much of that do we actually engage in? And I bring a few examples of social psychologists that talk about how we measure a man, say women looking at a man standing next to a Porsche, or there's some dangerous stereotyping that goes on in this realm, but there also, in terms of studies that have been done, show that male and female humans have a similar way of incorporating materials into their rituals that enhance them, embellish them. Like the bowerbird brings shiny objects that have no physical bearing on fitness or the health of the female, bringing her food. If it's just a shiny object, we have our own shiny objects, like giving jewelry or something symbolic. And again, going back to courtship and the importance of it, it's what I wanted to do with that chapter is to remind us how doing very simple behaviors or taking time to be together in a special event helps build our relationship.
All right, and we've got a wrap. So any final words?
No, thank you so much for having me. It's great to talk to you.
It's been really awesome. So my guest has been Dr. Caitlin O'Connell. She's the author of the new book, Wild Rituals, 10 Lessons Animals Can Teach Us About Connection, Community, and Ourselves. Her website is CaitlinO'Connell with 2 L's at the end.com. Her social media handle is Elephant Skinny. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great to be here.